Congratulations, you made it to Unit 4 of Section 2. Now, so far in this section, we've learned or looked at a lot of construction. We've focused on storyboarding, preparing, and planning. This may be the most important section of all. And for Unit 4, I thought it'd be appropriate to look at planning and construction of art and sequential art and narrative throughout history a little bit. Maybe look at the construction of how multiple images have been used. I also want to look at why artists use images in the order they use them, and why they choose to depict what they depict in each of those orders. Now, standalone pieces, don't get worried. You're not being left out. Every single time we reference an image and look at its composition, we look at the colors, we look at the layout, we look at why the artist chose to do what they did in that image, we are giving you information for your standalone piece. Standalone pieces are different than sequential pieces in that sequential pieces have more room to tell a story, they have more space, more images can be used to drive the narrative. With sequential art, it's more challenging. You're saying or telling a story in one image, and that can be very, very, very rewarding if done appropriately and correctly. Now, art is subjective in its meaning that you may look at something and get a lot from it, and another person looks at it and they don't pull as much. So there's no completely right way to do it. But what is correct, what we can focus on, is the application of the colors and mediums. We can look at proper sequencing of images and the proper composition of a standalone piece. These things all together can help us form something that others can look at and pull something from. Whether that's different from one person to the next, it doesn't matter. What you're trying to say can be conveyed in that much space. So let's go ahead and get started with Unit 4 of Section 2 and look at sequential art and its narratives throughout history. I'm Christopher Epling, and thank you so much for taking this course. So, if I were to show you these three symbols, maybe I could color them in where you can see them. And if I were to tell you, as I was drawing these three symbols, that it's actually a word. In fact, it's a word that we commonly use, and especially in a workshop such as this. These three symbols, to you, or to me, seen before now, may appear just to be random symbol objects, lines, whatever they may be. But to the early Egyptians, these were actually very significant markings, and through these symbols, the Egyptians were able to communicate much as we do today through words. And in fact, each one of these symbols represented a letter. A, R, T, art. Symbols have been used throughout history to show different types of situations, different types of events happening, and they're used primarily in early civilizations. And if you want to call them civilizations, these were actually early cave paintings. And most of these can be found in France. But if you notice them, they depict an image. That image tells something. It's actually a form of communication. We think of art often today as being something beautiful, which it can be and often is. And we think of art as being something that translates maybe emotion or conveys a certain type of attitude, which is all true too. But we don't always think of art as communication. But symbols and drawings and shapes can be conveyed into some sort of a symbol that represents communication. For instance, in this particular cave painting, we see people hunting with bow and arrow, and we also see antelope or some form of antelope, deer, running. Often they would leave, they being early civilizations, would leave these symbols on walls of caves to let others know who come to that cave that there's food around. Or perhaps there's horses, or perhaps there's more food, or even different types of animals. So mankind slowly started to use these symbols. They realized that it was a form of communication, and they started to form symbols into words. Now, of course, this is cross civilizations. Early, Cro-Magnon and different types of eras and things have produced different types of communication using symbol. But over time, though, these symbols started to become something of words or letters, form of communication. Now, early Egyptians would use these hieroglyphs to create a system of letters, and these letters, of course, as we've seen in the first image of writing the word art, can form words. So, in a sense, drawing has produced language. We communicate, letters produce words, which we speak words, but how can we speak art? There's no way to really speak art, but in a way we are. We're speaking art right now. I'm speaking art. Every single civilization has had a form of communication. Now, what we're trying to do in this course is tell a story, convey something. So if our early ancestors have been doing this throughout history, it shouldn't be too difficult for us to do that through something we're producing today. Now, your two options have been, since the start of this course, either a standalone piece or sequential images. Here we see how different types of images have produced letters. Letters produce words, which we speak, communication, and language. With language, we can say things. That's how art kind of translates itself into storytelling, into narrative. Now, it wasn't only early Egyptians who would communicate using symbols and letters. Early Christians would also create different types of you know images and different types of situations produced to show communication. So what I'm trying to say is this: is that art itself went from early forms of communication in the most simplest form into letters and symbols which produce words. And then man started to realize that we could actually take art, and when I say man, I mean mankind, could take this form of communication and say much more than just a word. For early Christians, this was a form of communication of their faith. Early Christians were able to use this to show different settings and different types of situations. Large productions of these types of situations were either drawn or etched into the walls and different types of structures in this civilization. Here we have another form of early Christian art done on a cave wall. This produces different types of emotion to early people. Whenever you would see this, even though you would not, or I would not, immediately understand what is going on, you can bet that the people living in this time period surely did. Now, when you see these different types of large etchings and these large structures, you can start to see that people communicated using symbols throughout different civilizations and throughout different types of even eras. Early Chinese etchings and drawings would say many things. Sometimes they were very focused on architecture. They were also very focused on the different types of settings that were going on and the people. These were very important. If you notice in this particular picture, there's symbols all around the important middle Buddha. Different types of situations can be depicted through standalone pieces, and to different eras they mean different things. For us, for example, when we look at this, we may not know exactly what's happening, but the people living in this era surely did. We look at all these different types of settings and we try to understand what was trying to be conveyed. What was the story being told? Who are these people? Why are they drawn in this way? What style? What is going on with the architecture behind them? And are those clouds or dust? Or so many questions beg to be answered when we look at early civilizations' art. Bet that many people during this period would know exactly what these etchings means. For example, we go back to this one. If someone was looking at this from this era, they may know exactly what the setting is and what's happening. But for us, we have to use our imagination. Or we have the option of going into history and actually researching to find out what was being said. This is from a cave in China. Settings like this and different types of pictures like this would convey different things to different people. We look then at Indian work. Now, Indian work had a lot of settings where they were drawn in caves as well, but also etchings into stone, telling a story, conveying an idea, sharing a narrative, getting a point across. Important people, important higher ups would often use these huge sculptures and these giant reliefs that would go across buildings, and people would walk by and look at these and they would be able to tell a story. Who's important here? Who's not? Who is winning? Who's failing? all across the different landscapes of different civilizations. Art, sculpture, these things have been used to say something, to tell a story. And now you're telling a story. So what is your story going to be? Will people be able to look at your painting or your sequential piece many years from now and say, I know what's going on? Or will it look something like this to other people? We only can guess. So even Russian work, if you look at the early Russian uh, different types of paintings and different reliefs from this, you can see that many of them used images in this way that we're talking about now today. We see this throughout history and throughout time, that many um, uh, points and dramas and narratives are shared. And look at the panels around this sequential piece here. In the middle we have an image, and then surrounding that image are different boxes. I call them panels. Maybe you could say that even early mankind was using these interesting ways of layouts for pictures to say something. And it could be almost said that early comics almost resemble these types of paintings from this civilization in Russia, this early civilization in Russia. We have panels, different boxes that say different things, surrounded by one central image. It's interesting to see this, but this is work here that was actually using comics, panels, boxes to say something. And look at their interesting order that they have these in. When you think of comics, typically you think of one box after another, one panel after another, but it's not always the case. You can have an image in the background with small boxes surrounding it. Let's look more at this before jumping ahead. There's something else I want to show you. Take a look at this piece. Now this is a sequential piece. This is using photography to show that. So here we have every single moment of this person's flip in the water. Every single second is, or not second I say, but every position is clearly defined and captured. Sequential pieces tell something, but look at the time space between the beginning of this panel to the end. How many seconds are passing here? So not only are we using art to say something, we're using art to tell time as well. I'd say this man falling couldn't have been more than maybe what? A second to 2 seconds? But we captured that forever inside of these panels. That is exactly what I'd like to see from you. I'd like to see you capture time and tell a story within that time period. Now the really neat thing about art is this. As I said before, you can structure your panels in different ways. So if I were to go into here and I were to make just boxes, and I'm using this to maybe create a comic strip. I have a box here, a box here, a panel here. I'll start calling them panels. We have 3 panels here. Now this is a very typical order of a comic strip. It's very neat, very organized. Now the panels that we're using, now they do differ in size. They do differ in length anyway. All of them are pretty much the same height. But the width varies. That's good. Now what if I were to put this all inside of one other panel? Every bit of this is happening. So there's actually art in behind here taking place. And when the viewer, when they look at this, they see this other art inside of this art taking place. Use space in this way. Use space wisely when you're creating your piece, either a standalone piece or something different. You can do that. It's very easy to look at the space that you have and try to think of it in a different way. Think about how much space you have to work in. Another idea, let's say that I have this much space for a canvas. This is my canvas. This is all the space that I have. Now imagine this though to be a lot larger. Imagine it to be maybe, 2 feet tall. 2 feet wide, I should say. This is all the space that I have. Now inside of this space, I can do many things. I can maybe go ahead and do one large painting of a person looking at a sunset, the ocean. Or I can use this space and break it up in a way that I can tell another narrative using panels or boxes or spaces there for you to play with. So if I had this space and I made 3 boxes here instead of 1 large, and then inside of those boxes I told a similar story. A person watching the sunset. If you can tell that, I hope you can. This is the ocean, the beach. They're sitting on a rock. And I start to use this space differently now. Maybe I'll do a little closer up this time of the person, the water off into the distance. And then maybe I'll go ahead in this scene and just show the sun. Maybe just have a small part of it peeking up. That's good. A small part of the sun peeking up from the water. Just a little bit left before it's gone for that day. Now, in this, I was able to show the passing of time. It's hard to tell exactly how much time had passed between the first panel and the last, but we can imagine, knowing what we know about sunsets, that it couldn't be more than a few minutes, okay? But we only know that because maybe we've had experience where we've actually encountered a sunset before. So use this space to show something. You don't have to show time passing, but you probably also can't get away from it, to be honest. It's going to happen. The cool thing about art is that we can show the passing of time in a really cool way. We can either show example here of the man falling, which is maybe a few seconds, as we agreed. But we can also show something much larger than that. For instance, let's just pretend these are 2 panels from a story, a sequential story. Only 2 panels that we have. How much time can we actually show passing between those panels? There's a really wonderful book. Those of you who love comics and sequential art, it's called Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art. And in this book, which is written by Scott McCloud, he talks about the passing of time. And the really cool point that he makes is that inside of these panels here, this space in between what's happening, in between the narrative, this space here can be any amount of time we want. So between this happening and this happening, who knows? It could be 2 minutes, 2 years, it could be 200 years, 2,000 years. It doesn't matter. So the point he likes to make is that what if inside of this panel here, we have a couple of people and they're sitting inside of a cave and there's a fire here, okay? And these people are around the cave and the cave is above them, over their head, and on this cave we see cave paintings, okay? So we see those images of those deer running and the people shooting them with bow and arrow. And we see this on the cave. Now, once we see this image, we automatically believe this is many, many, many years ago, right? That's what comes up in our imagination. These people are sitting in this cave, they're hunter and gatherers, and it's many, many, many years ago. And then in this panel, he does something really cool where he shows this structure hanging out here. Okay, down below we have the Earth, and here's space. So we see a satellite in orbit, okay, and it's orbiting the Earth. Now, how much time has passed in between the cavemen and women and space travel and space exploration? This area in comics and sequential art can be manipulated, played with. Many things can be done to show different types of things happening. Now, another thing that I'd like to share with you within this course is a term in art called a triptych and a diptych. Now, a triptych and I can say it right, a triptych and a diptych are 2 terms that are used to show or to explain art in sequence. So here we have a good example of that. And these were created usually on very, very large canvas, connected with hinges where it would open up like a book. So if you could imagine the two left and right paintings folding outward to reveal the inner painting. So we have a situation here where there's a sequential piece going on. This is much smaller, but look at the way that the artist has created this to tell a story. So there's a story happening here. Images are being portrayed. This amount of time in between those images, so the amount of time in between those hinges, who knows, it could be current day, it could be current moment, or it could be many, many years in the past or future. So working with these types of diptychs and triptychs, you can play around and do a lot of cool stuff. Now, a triptych is 3 panels, and a diptych is 2, if I'm not mistaken. So I may be wrong on that, but this is something that you could do as well for standalone pieces. You could put together something like this where you include an additional piece on there to tell a story. That's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine to do. I'd love to see some diptychs and triptychs in this work, because this really, honestly, kind of pulls together all the elements of this course. You know, students can either work in a sequential way using multiple images or one standalone image. Well, what if we took 3 standalone images or 2 standalone images and we put those together? This is what we would have. Another way to think about comics is to go ahead and look at others' work. Now, this is an amazing, amazing artist who is talking in this particular piece. This is an online comic, so if you go, you can actually scroll and look at their work. Go to stuartmcmillan.com if you're interested. And in this, you the viewer, have to scroll left to right to read his comic. What you're seeing on the screen right now is all you would be able to see if you're on his website. Okay, so he plays around a little bit with how you're viewing it, which makes it cool. But also what he's talking about in this comic is the internet and his use of social media and getting lost in the internet. So what he decides to do is to block out time. He decides he's going to actually go through and remove himself from the internet. Only limit himself to a certain amount of time being on the internet. Only a certain amount of time to actually go about and, do his email. And so what happens is when he starts blocking out more time, where he actually turns off his phone and disconnects his internet from his home, it's more time to do things, to live outside of the internet, to go camping, hiking, to do different things he normally wouldn't. And this has turned into a revolution for him, because when he turns off or disconnects, he gets more work done. And at the end, you can actually watch videos. He talks about his work and why he's doing what he's doing and what he's trying to say, which can be really cool. And if you want to check out his sequential piece, you should do it. I really think he's a cool artist. The thing about this is that you're playing with 3 elements here. Not only do you have boxes and this passage of time in between these boxes, you're also having to look at things differently. So you're actually looking at this from left to right, which makes it really cool. I just think it's an amazing way to work. Now, I want to share a couple more things with you before we sum up this last portion. If you think it's really hard to say something in just a short amount of time, one artist you should really check out is a man by the name of Bill Watterson, and he created Calvin and Hobbes. And every single week, he had to say something, share an idea, convey a story, tell a joke within a short amount of time. So only 4 panels. He only had so much space. You couldn't squeeze this down into little panels and create 300 panels here. He had to make it large enough so that people could read it. So he's limited to how many panels he could use. But every single week, he had to create something that folks can see and read and like. And this is tremendously hard to do. And if you want to see what a good example of that is, then you should check out his work. Now, this is his Sunday strips collected. So every Sunday he had more space to tell something in, to say something in. But it's really just remarkable how he was able to do that. And all cartoonists, all comic artists, cartoonists, typically what you think in a newspaper, their ability to do that is just amazing. This is one more thing I want to share with you. If you look at this is something I created to show all the different arrangements you could possibly have of panels on a particular page. So you can see there's hundreds of different examples of this. So if I were to enlarge the page a bit, it would give me more space. But for this particular 10 by 10 paper, square piece of paper, this is all of the different arrangements that I could possibly use or produce of a sequential art piece. And it's really fun to think about art in this way. It really is. I hope you're able to think of it differently too, and I hope you're able to see things differently. And those of you interested in creating those diptychs and triptychs, please go ahead and do that. But please remember throughout this process, you can create something amazing and cool. Use all the elements you have available to you, the space you have, the composition, what you're trying to say, and the method you're trying to say it, and really produce something amazing. I know you're going to. I can't wait to see it. It's truly amazing if you think about it. Visual narratives can take a viewer from the beginning of time to the future and what it may be like. And it's done so through the construction of panels and boxes. Whether it's even one box, one giant standalone piece, one snapshot in time, one small little insight or peek hole into a situation or an idea or a moment. So much can be conveyed through art. Art is meant to do that. You can't help but do that. When you look at something, you automatically consume it and think about it. You like it, you don't like it, it's confusing, it's very, very understandable. Art is relative and it's also subjective. It's amazing, it's wonderful, and you're creating it. So thank you for working through this course. We're heading on now to Section 3, Unit 1, and I'm really, really happy that you're with me. So let's go ahead and finish up for today, and be sure to post your work. And for this week's assignment, I'd like to see you choose a layout that you like. Whether it's one standalone piece or multiple pieces together, it doesn't matter. I want you to pick a narrative piece, either a painting or a page of a comic or a graphic novel or a children's book. Show me something that you like and enjoy. It can be a standalone piece, it could be a sequential art piece. And post it, save it, and then post it on the holler into the assignment section of this course. Alright, so thanks a lot. I look forward to seeing what you choose. I really do. Until next time, I'm Chris Epling, and thanks again for taking the Graphic Arts course.